Welcome to the Path Forward Podcast. I'm your host, Augie Gillarducci. The Path Forward Podcast is sponsored by Second Opportunity, and we are inside jails and prisons around the country with the podcast. We also are on the traditional podcast networks on the outside, but this is a podcast that we've been doing for more than a year now, and our focus is on helping currently and formerly incarcerated people to hear stories, gather resources, information related to reentry, and those that have already released and are struggling a little bit to maybe bring some hope and some insight as to some different pathways that might be available to them. My guest today is Chris Mamone. Chris, welcome and thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me, Augie.
So what I want to do is kind of dive in on this. This is a way that we communicate with people on the inside. And I guess I want to start by asking you, what is it that you do professionally that we're going to talk to our audience about?
I'm what I like to call an acceptance coach, and I help people heal from grief, loss, and trauma to step into their personal power and discover their self-acceptance.
And so I know those things, grief, loss, those go hand in hand with incarceration. And so many that are watching this will have experienced what you're talking about. So I'd like to, kind of turn it over to you and start by asking, how is it that you got involved in the work that you do? And if you don't mind sharing a little bit about maybe where you're located and how this all came together for you.
Yeah, certainly. My life has been anything but easy in a lot of ways. And I've faced a lot of career rejection with jobs. I've had rejection personally with family. My biggest moments, because I could sit here and talk all day about this, but my biggest moments that led me down my path to being an acceptance coach was losing my grandfather to terminal cancer in 2020. I came home from across country and my grandfather passed away in my arms, and it was my first real experience with death. And it shook my world in a lot of ways I wasn't ready for. And so in the midst of that whole situation happening, half the family alienated me and badmouthed me for things that my mother and my grandmother did when they handled that situation. So I dealt with some rejection again from family I'd known for most of my life. Less than 2 years after that, same thing happened. I had rejection at a job. I had my in-laws bullied my wife and I while we were pregnant with our first child. So my wife and I tragically lost our son the day before he was supposed to be born. In the middle of all that abuse, we lost a child. And again, that was really faced with a lot of pain and a lot of anger and a lot of frustration and a lot of, I don't understand why this is happening. There's a lot of thoughts that go on. And I'm glad you and I are talking today, because I'm sure people who are incarcerated right now face a lot of those topics, whether or not inside and when they go out for release. So what led me on my path was I said to myself that when I face this situation I'm in constantly, there's got to be meaning behind it. So I turned it into, how are these moments a gift, a lesson, or a blessing in my life? How are they those boxes? And can I call them those? And so, the other half that I labeled the situation losing my son is that was a gift in shitty wrapping paper. It's the one we didn't ask for. It's the one we didn't want. And it's the thing that we go, what do we do with this? What am I supposed to do with this? I didn't want this in my life. But when we're able to look at it from that view of a gift and a lesson and a blessing, and we put control back within ourselves, and we're able to make that experience something very powerful for us and something bigger than us, by the way. And when that happens, we're able to move forward in our life in a more meaningful, purpose-driven way. And that's what I chose, handling my grief and going through rejection and loss constantly. As I said, there's more people out there than me experiencing this. And for me to, have depression over this and ruin my life over it, it's really going to miss out on giving that gift to somebody else to help them heal and transform through those circumstances. So I just chose to step out and say, I'm going to go help people who are going through grief and loss and trauma, because I want more for them. I want to leave people better than I found them. And so those experiences is what led me down to becoming an acceptance coach.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I do my best on the podcast to keep things focused on who the guest is because it's their story that I want to bring forward. But every so often I'll share experience that I had that I think is relevant, and in this case I have to say is, and it still hurts to talk about, but I was less than 6 months into a 190-month sentence, and within that first 6 months, my mother was diagnosed with and died from pancreatic cancer, and didn't see it coming. It was devastating, and um, I had about 2 years remaining in my sentence, and my father died of a stroke. And this is at the time where I thought that soon we're going to be reunited, and because he obviously had gone into a more lonely existence after my mom had died. They'd been married for more than 50 years or whatever. Um, but I bring that up because this podcast for me, it's for the people on the inside. And I bring that up to say that I still maintain I never had the opportunity to properly grieve because that's not something that is easily done inside an incarcerated environment. So I wanted to share that piece of me with the audience to say that if you've gone through this, or if you end up going through this while you're locked up, I certainly hope it doesn't happen. But if it does, it's one of those real challenges to try to get through because we can't grieve in the normal ways. At least I should say I couldn't grieve in the normal way. It's just that just it's not the way that you carry yourself inside. So with that being said, as you talk about some of the things that you do to help people that have gone through grief, loss, and trauma, and so on, what are some of the things that you can talk about with those that are watching this that are helpful tools or resources or strategies they may be able to use to be able to overcome those things?
Uh, I have quite a few, probably more than we could go on this podcast, but I'll share the basic ones that gave me a foundation. And I'm glad you shared that story about your not being able to grieve properly in the incarceration environment, and that you shared that story with me because that's something that I learned the hard way through my losses, both of them. I didn't really have anybody to work through those. I had to figure it out myself. And I will say that's a very, very hard place to be. And my real advice that I would give people that are grieving right now on an array of different experiences, that the first one is that you want to um, you really want you want to try to find acceptance for it is the one you want to go down. And what I try to tell people about that is it's not about whether you like it or not, or that you just have to be at peace with it and be calm with it and be happy about it. It's acceptance is very much just being the observer in that situation and just taking it for what it is for you and just accepting that that's what happened. And that's a very hard place, by the way, to start, but it allows you to be in that frame of mind to just look at that objectively. The next thing that you really want to do in that process, I'm just saying this related to the audience today, is work on forgiving yourself. I know we always talk about forgiving other people and, always focusing on that other person that we may have hurt or done something, but forgive yourself and be kind to yourself. That's the big one I learned through the grief process. We all make mistakes. We all do things in life. All of us do. No, nobody's clean on the planet. And I've learned that when you can forgive yourself and say, I made a mistake, or I did something wrong, or I could have done something better. I did the best I could with the tools and knowledge I had in the moment that I knew that I had to do, and that's okay. Tell yourself that's okay because you didn't know any better, and now you do because of that experience. So everything really becomes a gift and a lesson and a blessing from that standpoint, and that can remove a lot of self blame, self judgment that we all beat ourselves up with. That can remove a lot of that for you. And that forgiveness and the grief process for yourself can bring you to a place of acceptance very quickly. Um, my other tools that I say can really help people is if you're able to journal down your thoughts and journal down the emotions you feel. So instead of saying things like, a common one I get in my coaching practice a lot is, I'm angry, I'm upset, I'm sad. You're not any of those things. Those are emotions you're feeling. And so I always tell people, when you feel those emotions, don't say I am, but say I feel this, because there's a message behind your emotions that's trying to communicate with you. And when we don't listen to that part of ourselves, we're actually fighting ourselves internally. And so when you learn to listen to it and just say, I feel this way, and write that down, however you feel, you'll find a place of calm, believe it or not. It'll lead you to a place of calm. And it'll also lead you to a place of understanding for yourself. And you can, when you walk that path of learning how to feel your emotions and understand what they're trying to tell you, um, I've learned with a lot of people. For example, I worked with a few people who were very focused on anger last week. When we worked through that anger with them, what we really found out behind that was is that anger is the part that loves you the most. It's not this terrible thing society says that it is, and that you're a bad person because you're angry. You're not any of those things. What you are, by the way, is somebody that is not being seen or heard or understood, or you feel not safe in a situation. That's what that anger really is. And so, unfortunately, society doesn't understand that, but I do. And that's where, when I talk to people and have an opportunity like today to be on your podcast, I want to share that with people, because anger is not a bad thing. It's a tool that gets us to that next phase of grief and our way to heal. And so that's a big resource that I would share that can help lay the foundation for your healing process.
I'd like to, if we could, go back for a minute on self forgiveness.
Mhm.
And, I, in one of our courses, I know I have it in there someplace, but I found a process that started with personal responsibility, taking responsibility for being in the situation that I was in. And it took me a while to get there because I think that many of us, when we get incarcerated, we start out as like a 6 or a 7-year old, and we want to either blame other people or justify it. So it was the judge's fault, the prosecutor's fault, the guy who told on me's fault, or justifies, well, everybody was doing it. I just happened to get caught on this thing. And so when I got to the point of taking responsibility, I think there was some good that came from that, but there was also a negative side of that, and I don't know if you experienced this and some with some of the people that you talk to, but I got angry with myself, and I used to say that the best time of the day for me was about the first 3 or 4 seconds in the morning, because there's that time where you open your eyes, but your brain hasn't fully engaged, and all it is the start of a new day until your brain engages and you realize that you're staring up at the bottom bunk of a in a prison cell. You're staring up at the ceiling or whatever it might be. And so I went through a fairly long period of time where I was very upset with myself for being greedy and foolish and insensitive and all these things. So for me, it was a real process to get to the point that I ultimately could settle on saying I made some decisions that were terrible. I did some things that I wish I hadn't done, but there's nothing I can do about it now. And that's when I learned to forgive myself. And I just want to again share that because I think from an incarcerated perspective, I think a lot of people go through that same thing. Many don't reach all the way to getting to the self forgiveness, and some don't get to the point where they take responsibility. I mean, but I think many of us that we go through those phases to get there. So, what would your suggestion be to somebody that may be stuck before they get to self forgiveness and they're having a hard time getting to that point? Maybe they're stuck on being angry with themselves or not being realistic in taking responsibility for what they own.
I'm glad you brought that up, because after I lost my son, and we went no contact with my in-laws, I still had a lot of, I learned it's called a trauma loop that we all get into. And I had to discover that. And basically what happens to us is, in those moments, we get stuck up here and it kind of circles around like a spinning globe, if you will. And we're reliving, almost re-traumatizing ourselves. we're analyzing every little thing that's going on in that moment, and it keeps us stuck in that place. Our brain gets stuck in a fight or flight pattern. And that's where, if you are struggling with self-forgiveness, by the way, even healing from grief, it is completely normal for you to feel that way. Believe it or not, it's normal because there's something missing that you're not getting. That's the thing. There's an answer not being met. There's a clarification you might need over a situation that happened. I'm glad you brought it up because I haven't been incarcerated before or gone through that court process, but I can say there's probably a lot of things that come up, like you mentioned about the judge didn't hear this or understand that, the prosecutor didn't get this, this situation happened because of X. There's so many things and variables, by the way, that I'm sure in that process can be very misunderstood by somebody that's facing incarceration. And that can be very challenging to work through and find acceptance with. Something that I've learned on my own personal journey, and I've learned watching, coaching other people, is that this path that we're on, we don't always see it later. I always say hindsight's 2020. We'd make a different decision if we knew what we did now back then. So when we're struggling with that, there's a piece of the puzzle missing, and that's the place where you really have to work in this balance of letting go of some things and then also accepting things at a certain point. And that it's hard for me to say those things because I went through this and it took me a certain amount of time for me to do it. And so I can share that every person's individual with this path, and you may get to that point. And like you said, the first 6 months, I would add that 3-4 seconds of my day that I wasn't in prison. I was just there and present. It may take people a long time to get to that place. And so it's a constant work and it's a constant battle to get there. But this is where I say that if you're careful with the language you tell yourself, by the way, and this is where I'd say a lot of my clients will say, I'm angry or I'm upset or I'm misunderstood. We're identifying with those hard emotions we have. And if we can figure out how to be kinder to ourselves and talk to ourselves better and just say that, we made a mistake and that's okay. And really get it down to that place of not getting out of that blame and getting out of that place of wanting to push everything away. If we can take little tiny steps towards taking ownership over what we did, we can slowly build to that place to get to acceptance.
So I want to go back on another thing you said. There were a lot of men, over the years I was locked up with thousands of guys, and there were a lot of guys that did journal. That was something that they seemed to enjoy doing, and they used to have those little the black and white composite workbooks that they'd carry around or they'd use at certain times of the day, and I found a lot of benefit in that as well. But and you had mentioned about journaling. So what would your suggestion be to somebody that's sitting in a cell right now watching this and they haven't even thought about journaling, and what would you suggest would be the first couple of steps they could take, and what are they trying to accomplish when they put a pencil to paper? What is it that they should expect or that they should desire the outcome to be?
What I would recommend to anybody who is new to journaling or says, I have no idea what this is, how do I even start this? The real short answer to that is just start. Grab a pen and paper. And what I'll share with you, the easy way to do this is don't put limitations on yourself. Don't say I have to write a certain way or I've got to write about a certain topic. It could really be, I woke up today and had these thoughts in my head. And just write them down in full. The nice part about journaling, by the way, it's only what's in your mind and it's only for you. It's not for anybody else. It's not to make anybody happy. It's not to make anybody else feel good. It's really meant for you to take what's trapped up here and get it down on the paper. And what that does, by the way, is it allows you, if you think about our senses, the way we hear things, the way we see things, it draws on those senses for ourselves. And so when we start taking what's in here and throw it on paper, we then start seeing things differently. And we might write down for example, like I'm really angry today. Well, we might write that down, but once we write that, we start asking ourselves subconsciously, well, what's causing me to be angry, or why am I angry today? And then you'll notice yourself start to write. By the way, you'll say, I had this thought today. I was missing my family, or I wasn't able to see my family on visitation day this week. And I'm really upset about that because I was really looking forward to it. You'll get all those thoughts out and those processings. And what it'll do, by the way, is help you change your internal dialogue, and it'll help you process your grief in a better way. But you'll also, more importantly, and I think this is the big one, is that you will learn to understand yourself better. Because while I haven't been incarcerated, and maybe Augie, maybe you can elaborate on this for me, but I feel from what I've seen on TV and everything like that, that there's always this judgment and stigma of being incarcerated. There's always this vision of who you are, and it has nothing to do with you, sadly. Um, and so I feel like journaling gives you that ability to get in touch with your authentic self of who you are. And that's what I mean by self-acceptance, is your authentic self, not what the judge labeled you, not what the court labeled you, not what anybody inside labeled you, but who you are individually. And that's where you can really take back your personal power.
It's it's hard to describe, but prison to me was this environment that became, the movie Groundhog Day with Bill Murray became Groundhog Day pretty quickly. That it's the same routine. You're eating at the same time. Lights go out at the same time, and so on and so forth. But you're surrounded by people. I mean, the one thing that we have in common is that we're surrounded. Every one of us that was there didn't want to be there, and so I don't think I don't think I found the inside of prison as judgmental, because I think everybody, kind of had the feeling that, I mean, my attitude was, I don't care what a guy did to be there. Didn't matter to me. I don't need to know. Don't really want to know. But I think that for those that are watching this on the outside, especially when you first released, that's a real challenge. That's a real challenge. I mean, I tell people that when I went away, I didn't have this issue, but since I've gotten out, I've been out more than 7 years now. I definitely developed social anxiety, and that really came up when I first got out. So that I could be standing in a room with 8 people, and I would have thoughts in my head that every one of these other people know what I know. I've been to prison. They know that I just got out. They know what I did, and they're judging me for it. And so I think that for me and others, I'm with people that have been locked up all the time. I'm with people who are locked up every week. I'm in a facility, but I think on the outside, there's far more of that we deal with than on the inside. On the inside, I think the way the inside flows is that people just kind of go about their business, um, waiting for that day to come where they get released.
Yeah, I can't imagine how hard that transition would be, by the way, to go from an environment where you're in prison, where everything is controlled. You eat at the same time, lights out at the same time, get up at the same time. And then when you get your life back and you get to go on the outside, you're not only having to readjust, by the way, to you get to control all that now. All that stuff that was controlled for you, you now get to control. You get to decide.
And it can be overwhelming. There's no question about that. I do a lot of work with employers. Been doing that since I got out, lobbying employers to hire individuals that have records, criminal backgrounds, and now there's a wide movement of fair chance employers, and it's really kind of sweeping the country, which is a great thing, for people that are on the inside and or people who are out that are looking for a job or a career. But um, I would tell employers that if you hired somebody that's recently released and you tell them your hours are from 8 until 5, you get a half hour for lunch, take it whenever you want. That's really the worst thing that they can tell somebody who's recently released. because I'm not going to go to lunch. I'm going to be afraid that while I'm at lunch, the supervisor is going to walk up to where I'm working at and say I'm not there and think that I'm being lazy or something, that I'm not doing what I should be. And I tell them that, that those type of freedoms, they can be overwhelming. And so it's better to say you get lunch every day, take it from 11:30 till 12. And because then I'm in a routine, because we're in such a routine that it's really hard to accept when there is no routine, that I don't know, I can have breakfast at whatever time I want. Whereas I knew, during the week, if I wasn't at the front door at 6 o'clock and in the chow hall by 6:30, I wasn't getting breakfast that day. And so I think that, some of these things we have to figure out for ourselves, but part of why we try to do what we do is to let people know that, that's kind of a natural part of the process, is that when we get our freedom or our liberties back, too much too fast can be absolutely overwhelming.
Yeah, I agree. That's what I tell people that I coach that are going through grief and loss, and especially trauma. When you go through a massive change like that, like going from incarceration to freedom, too much too fast, it can really shake your body in a lot of bad ways. You can get anxiety, you can get PTSD from that. You really can, because that's such a radical change of environment. And what the biggest thing I share too about, any kind of grief or loss is that there is no time limit for you to heal from that. There's really not. There's no way for me to say, even with people I coach, there's no way for me to say 6 months from now, you're going to be fine. You're going to be all better. It's not going to matter. I can't say that, because my own grief journey took me years to work through. Same thing with my clients. It takes years to get through this stuff. I very rarely have talked to people that can handle it in months and be fine. I've rarely talked to people that can do that. So I always encourage, be patient with yourself, be kind to yourself. Please take time to understand who you are, how you process grief. Everybody does it differently. And I just don't think that, um, from my experience of life, there's just not a one size fits all box for this. There's just not. And um, I imagine when you get out of incarceration, I mean, you're having to figure out where to live, you're having to figure out where to work, you maybe are dealing with reconnecting with family. Maybe some family doesn't even want to talk to you again. And you're having to go through so many major life changes, major ones that are not easy decisions. And that can be very hard. But I would encourage, everybody listening to this podcast, that there are resources like Augie. There's resources like me out in the world. There's community resources you can take. And I encourage you by all means to seek that out when you're in that position, because I went through my grief journey mostly alone, and I will share with you, it was a scary place for me. I had a hard time. I struggled. I went through a lot of deep depression. It was hard to pull out of things. There were days I didn't see the light. Um, and when you don't have support behind you, it's that much harder. And so, the other thing I would encourage too is, don't be scared to share your story. Please don't, because what I would encourage everyone today is that your path happened for you. It didn't happen to you. And regardless of that circumstance that happened, it does not mean that you're some bad, terrible person. It doesn't mean you can't fit into society. It doesn't mean any of that stuff. You went through that experience because you had to, and it happened for you. And so there's always a gift, and there's always a lesson and a blessing in there. And you may run into people on your path, by the way, forward from here, that you might see somebody go down that road you took, and you might be the person that saves them. You might be the one that steps up and says, I know where you're going with this. Please don't. Or if you are going down that road, I can help you. I want to be here to help you. And turn that pain into a directed power to help other people, because we all on this planet have different walks of life, and we all experience different things, and all of our experiences we have can help other people. And maybe, my gift that I learned, and why I became an acceptance coach, is that I don't want people to feel alone as they heal from grief and trauma. I don't want somebody to do what I did. I want to be able to say, hey, you're not alone. You have somebody here to talk to. And I know that everybody, who's incarcerated right now too, by the way, you can do that in a different format depending on your path. You can do that same exact thing and help other people. And that's the gift that we're all given, by the way. It doesn't you're nobody's special in that ballpark, but we all have that same gift to help other people. And so if you can do that, your contribution to the world would be huge. And it doesn't matter your background or what you did. You still have that ability to contribute.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for the conversation. I think that there's some great stuff. And, as I'm sitting here, um, I'm thinking back at some of now that I've got a little bit of space between when I was there and being out, things that I might have done differently, things that I might have done to better prepare myself. But some of it, I think, we just have to deal with as it happens because that's the way the world works. I very much appreciate your time and what you shared with us. I think there's value in there, and I'm hoping for the men and women on the inside and those that have been on the inside and are now on the outside, charting your new path. I'm hopeful that some of what you heard today from Chris and maybe put some context around things that you can do to help move along and on the inside to get through and be ready when your number is called to walk out the front door. So thank you for tuning in to the Path Forward podcast. We appreciate it very much. And we ask you to, if you have not seen all of the episodes, they should be on your tablet. Feel free to go back and watch all of them because I've been blessed to have many terrific guests. And if you have seen all of them, you should know that we release a new one every 2 weeks. So there's always going to be something to look forward to if you enjoy these types of conversations. So, again, thank you for being my guest, Chris, and thank you for tuning in to watch the Path Forward podcast. We look forward to seeing you next time.